Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history in the remote Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The autumn of 1910 in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Grayson County, Virginia, arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to settle into the very bones of the landscape. In the isolated hollow known locally as Widow's Bend, nestled between two steep ridges that blocked out the sun for most of each day, stood a substantial log cabin that would become the center of one of the most quietly unsettling family mysteries in Appalachian history. The structure, built in 1889 by master carpenter Thaddeus Grimwald, was larger than typical mountain dwellings, featuring two full stories, a wraparound porch, and unusually large windows that seemed to watch the forest with an almost human intensity. The geography of Widow's Bend itself contributed significantly to the isolation that would define the Grimwald family's story. The hollow was formed by ancient geological processes that had carved a narrow valley between two parallel ridges, each rising over 800 feet above the valley floor. The ridges ran almost perfectly north and south, creating a natural corridor that channeled winds and weather patterns in unusual ways. Local Cherokee legends, recorded by ethnographer Dr. Samuel Whitehorse in 1923, described the area as a place where the earth dreams deeply and where spirits of the old time sometimes forget to leave. The Cherokee had traditionally avoided permanent settlement in Widow's Bend, using it only as a seasonal hunting ground and a passage between more habitable valleys. According to tribal oral histories collected by Dr. Whitehorse, the area was associated with strange atmospheric phenomena that could disorient travelers and cause compasses to behave erratically. These accounts, while dismissed by most European settlers as superstition, proved to be remarkably accurate descriptions of the electromagnetic anomalies that would later be documented by scientific instruments. The hollow's isolation was further enhanced by its unique ecosystem. The valley floor, fed by numerous springs that emerged from the surrounding ridges, supported an unusually dense canopy of hardwood trees that blocked most sunlight throughout the year. The resulting environment was perpetually dim and humid, creating growing conditions that favored plants and fungi not commonly found in other parts of the Appalachian region. Local botanists who studied the area in later decades identified several species that appeared nowhere else in Virginia, suggesting that Widow's Bend functioned as a sort of biological refugium where ancient life forms had persisted in isolation. The first European settler to establish a permanent presence in Widow's Bend was Jeremiah Grimwald, Thaddeus's father, who claimed the land under the Homestead Act in 1867. Jeremiah was a former Union Army engineer who had served in the Corps of Engineers during the Civil War and possessed technical skills that were unusual among frontier settlers. His choice of Widow's Bend as a homestead location was influenced by his professional assessment of the area's natural resources, including abundant water, dense timber, and what his surveying instruments indicated were significant mineral deposits beneath the valley floor. Jeremiah's original cabin, built in 1868, was a modest structure designed for basic shelter while he developed the property's resources. However, his plans for commercial development were gradually abandoned as he became increasingly fascinated with the area's unique characteristics. His personal journal, discovered during a property survey in 1954, documents a growing obsession with what he termed the peculiar energies that seemed to concentrate in certain areas of the valley. In an entry dated September 1871, Jeremiah writes, "The compass readings continue to vary significantly depending on location within the valley. What I initially attributed to local iron ore deposits appears to be something far more complex. The variations follow patterns that suggest some form of underlying structure or organization, as if the very earth beneath us were arranged according to principles I do not yet understand. Jeremiah's engineering background led him to conduct increasingly sophisticated measurements of the electromagnetic phenomena he observed. Using instruments acquired through military contacts in Washington, he mapped what he described as fields of influence that seemed to emanate from specific points within the valley. These measurements, meticulously recorded in his journals, would later prove invaluable to researchers attempting to understand the scientific work that his son would eventually pursue. The elder Grimwald's investigations were interrupted by his death in a logging accident in 1885, but not before he had transmitted his fascination with Widow's Bend's mysteries to his son Thaddeus. The younger Grimwald had received a formal education in Richmond, studying both engineering and natural philosophy at what would later become Virginia Commonwealth University. His academic background provided him with theoretical knowledge that complemented his father's practical observations, setting the stage for the remarkable research that would eventually drive the family into complete isolation. Thaddeus returned to Widow's Bend in 1887 with his new wife, Euphemia Castleton, daughter of a Norfolk shipping merchant who had surprised her family by accepting a marriage proposal from a mountain hermit. Euphemia was no ordinary mountain wife. She had received an unusually comprehensive education for a woman of her era, including studies in mathematics, chemistry, and natural history. Her decision to embrace life in Widow's Bend was based not on romantic sentiment, but on genuine intellectual curiosity about the research possibilities that the location offered. The couple was joined by Thaddeus's unmarried sister, Cordula, who had trained as a nurse in Baltimore and possessed extensive knowledge of medicinal plants and chemical preparations. Cordula's medical training proved essential to the family's research, as she was able to monitor the health effects of various experimental procedures and synthesize chemical compounds with a precision that would have been impossible without formal training in pharmaceutical techniques. Euphemia's brother, Percival Ashworth, completed the core family group. Percival had worked as a railroad surveyor throughout the southeastern United States before suffering a severe leg injury that ended his career. His surveying experience had given him expertise in precision measurement and mechanical engineering that perfectly complemented Thaddeus's theoretical knowledge. Despite his physical limitations, Percival proved invaluable in designing and constructing the sophisticated apparatus that the family's research would eventually require. The household also included two individuals who, while technically hired help, became integral members of the research team. Joachim Krauss was a German immigrant who had worked in the precision instrument workshops of Philadelphia before seeking a quieter life in the mountains. His skills in metalworking and mechanical fabrication were essential for creating the custom apparatus that Thaddeus's experiments required. Krauss had also received informal training in electrical engineering through his work with early industrial applications of electrical power, knowledge that proved crucial as the family's research progressed into unexplored territory. The final member of the household was Magdala Prewitt, a local woman whose family had lived in the mountain region for several generations. While officially employed as cook and housekeeper, Magdala possessed extensive knowledge of local folklore, traditional healing practices, and the behavior of plants and animals that proved surprisingly relevant to the family's scientific work. Her understanding of seasonal cycles, weather patterns, and the subtle environmental cues that governed life in Widow's Bend provided essential context for interpreting the results of formal experiments. The Grimwald family's commitment to complete self-sufficiency was both a practical necessity and a deliberate strategy for maintaining the secrecy that their research required. Unlike most mountain families, who maintained regular contact with outside communities for trade and social purposes, the Grimwalds systematically severed almost all connections with their former lives. This isolation was not born of antisocial tendencies, but rather from what Thaddeus described in his personal writings as a need to pursue certain studies and practices that require complete privacy and freedom from interference. The process of achieving complete self-sufficiency required several years of careful preparation. The family established extensive gardens and orchards that could provide all necessary food, developed sources of materials for clothing and household goods, and created workshops capable of producing or repairing any tools or equipment they might need. Most significantly, they invested heavily in the construction of specialized facilities that would support Thaddeus's research while maintaining absolute secrecy from outside observers. The main residence, completed in 1889, was designed with features that were unusual for mountain dwellings of the period. The structure incorporated multiple fireplaces and chimneys that could be used to ventilate experimental apparatus, hidden storage areas for sensitive materials, and a basement level that extended much deeper into the hillside than would be necessary for normal root cellaring. The building's windows were positioned to provide optimal lighting for detailed work while minimizing visibility from outside the immediate property. More significant was the construction of what Thaddeus referred to in his journals as the workshop complex, a series of interconnected buildings that housed increasingly sophisticated experimental apparatus. The main workshop, completed in 1892, was designed with the precision of an industrial facility despite its remote mountain location. The building featured multiple electrical generators of Thaddeus's own design, elaborate ventilation systems, and structural reinforcements that could support heavy machinery and withstand the stresses of high-energy experiments. Adjacent to the main workshop was a smaller building that served as a chemical laboratory. This facility was equipped with distillation apparatus, reaction vessels, and storage systems for hundreds of different compounds, many of which Thaddeus synthesized using formulas derived from his own research. The chemical laboratory also included a library of scientific texts and journals that represented one of the most comprehensive collections of chemical and electrical knowledge available anywhere in the region. The most unusual structure on the property was a circular building constructed of fitted stone that Thaddeus identified in his journals as the observation chamber. This facility was designed to provide a controlled environment for making precise measurements of atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions. The chamber was positioned at what Thaddeus's surveys had identified as the geometric center of the valley's electromagnetic anomalies, allowing for optimal monitoring of the natural phenomena that formed the foundation of his research. The first indications that the Grimwald family was engaged in unusual activities began to reach the outside world in 1909, when travelers on the mountain roads that passed within several miles of Widow's Bend began reporting strange phenomena. These reports, while initially dismissed as frontier folklore, were sufficiently consistent and detailed to suggest that something genuinely unusual was occurring in the isolated valley. The most frequently reported phenomenon was the appearance of unusual lights emanating from the Grimwald property during nighttime hours. Unlike the warm yellow glow of ordinary lanterns or fireplaces, these lights were described as harsh white or blue illumination that seemed to pulse in regular patterns. Multiple witnesses reported that these lights were visible from distances of several miles, suggesting an intensity far greater than any artificial illumination available in rural Virginia during the early 1900s. Reverend Cornelius Blackwood, a circuit preacher who traveled throughout the mountain region, provided one of the most detailed accounts of these phenomena. In his journal, donated to the Virginia Historical Society in 1954, he describes an encounter that occurred while traveling the mountain road that passed closest to Widow's Bend. On the night of September 15, 1909, I was compelled to stop and observe the most extraordinary display of illumination emanating from the direction of the Grimwald property. The lights appeared to pulse in complex patterns that suggested some form of communication or signaling, though to what purpose I could not imagine. What struck me most forcefully was the precision and regularity of these patterns. They were not the random flickering of fire or the steady glow of electric lights, but rather a carefully orchestrated sequence of illumination that repeated every few minutes with clockwork precision. The patterns were complex enough to suggest intentional design, yet so alien in their rhythm and structure that I could not conceive of any earthly purpose they might serve. Reverend Blackwood's account continues with observations that prove to be prophetic. As I watched these lights from a distance of approximately 3 miles, I began to experience a most peculiar sensation. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an energy that I could feel in my bones, and I noticed that my pocket watch had begun to run irregularly, sometimes fast and sometimes slow, as if time itself were being affected by whatever force was producing the illumination. Most disturbing of all was the realization that the lights seemed to be aware of my presence. As I moved position along the road, the patterns of illumination would shift subtly, as if adjusting to maintain optimal visibility from my location. This apparent responsiveness to observation was so uncanny that I was eventually compelled to continue my journey rather than remain to study the phenomenon further. Sebastian Moorcock, a traveling merchant who supplied tools and materials to isolated mountain families, provided another detailed account of the strange phenomena surrounding the Grimwald property. His statement, given to the Grayson County Sheriff in 1910, describes not only visual phenomena, but also auditory effects that were equally disturbing. The sounds that carry from that valley on still nights are unlike anything I have encountered in 15 years of traveling these mountain roads. There is a low, rhythmic humming or buzzing that seems to resonate through the very ground, accompanied by occasional sharp crackling noises that remind me of lightning, but much more regular and controlled. What makes these sounds particularly unnerving is their persistence and regularity. They will continue for hours at a time, maintaining the same rhythm and intensity, as if produced by some vast machine operating with perfect precision. On several occasions, I have attempted to approach the source of these sounds, but the closer I get to the Grimwald property, the more intense the auditory effects become, until they reach a level that is physically uncomfortable to endure. Moorcock's account also describes his attempts to conduct business with the Grimwald family. Having heard rumors about their complete isolation and wanting to offer my services as a supplier, I decided to approach their property directly in the spring of 1910. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked, suggesting that they did occasionally receive visitors, though I had never heard of anyone actually conducting business with them. As I approached the main buildings, I was struck by the obvious prosperity and sophistication of their operation. The structures were well built and maintained, the grounds were carefully tended, and there were clear indications of ongoing construction and improvement projects. However, despite this evidence of activity and prosperity, my attempts to make contact with the inhabitants proved completely unsuccessful. I spent nearly 3 hours on the property, calling at various buildings and waiting in different locations, but I never encountered another human being. Most disturbing was the persistent feeling that I was being watched and evaluated, though I never saw any sign of observers. Several times I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look directly, I found only empty buildings or vacant forest. The chemical odors that Moorcock detected during his visit proved to be a consistent element in all accounts of the Grimwald property. The air throughout the property carried a sharp, metallic smell mixed with chemical odors that reminded me of a photographer's darkroom, but much more intense and complex. There were also underlying scents that I could not identify, sweet, organic odors that seemed almost medicinal, mixed with the harsh smell of burning metals and the ozone-like scent that accompanies electrical discharges. These odors were not uniform across the property but seemed to concentrate in certain areas, particularly around the workshop buildings and the strange circular structure that stood in a clearing near the center of the complex. The intensity of these smells varied throughout the day, sometimes barely noticeable, and sometimes strong enough to cause my eyes to water and my throat to burn. Dr. Silas Weatherby, a physician who provided medical services to isolated mountain families, attempted to visit the Grimwald property in November 1910 after receiving reports that someone in the household might be suffering from a serious illness. His professional journal, discovered among his papers in 1962, provides a medical perspective on the phenomena surrounding the property. The symptoms described to me, including prolonged periods of unconsciousness, unusual skin discoloration, and episodes of apparent delirium, suggested the possibility of chemical poisoning or exposure to toxic substances. Upon examining the property from a medical standpoint, I observed several factors that raised serious concerns about the health and safety of the inhabitants. The chemical odors that pervade the area are consistent with the use of substances that are known to be dangerous to human health, including compounds containing mercury, arsenic, and various organic chemicals that can cause severe systemic effects with prolonged exposure. Dr. Weatherby's medical training led him to notice details that other visitors had missed. The vegetation around certain areas of the property showed signs of chemical stress that suggested repeated exposure to toxic substances. Plants near the workshop buildings displayed unusual discoloration and growth patterns, and I observed areas where the soil itself appeared to have been chemically altered, showing discoloration and an unusual crystalline texture that I had never encountered in nature. Most significantly, I discovered what appeared to be a carefully prepared burial site in a secluded area of the property. The site consisted of a rectangular excavation that had been lined with fitted stones and prepared with obvious attention to detail. While the site showed no evidence of recent use, its presence suggested that the inhabitants were prepared for the possibility of fatalities resulting from their activities. The doctor's observations about the electromagnetic effects that other visitors had reported provided additional cause for concern. During my examination of the property, I experienced the same physical discomfort that other visitors have described, a sensation of pressure in the head and ears accompanied by nausea and dizziness. These symptoms became more severe as I approached certain areas of the property, particularly the circular stone building and the area around the main workshop. From a medical standpoint, these symptoms are consistent with exposure to strong electromagnetic fields, which can cause a variety of physiological effects including disorientation, nausea, and disturbances of the nervous system. The intensity of these effects suggested that the Grimwald family was working with electrical apparatus of unprecedented power and sophistication. Dr. Ule Weatherby's professional assessment of the situation was unequivocal. Based on my examination of the property and the various phenomena I observed, I have reached the conclusion that the Grimwald family is engaged in activities that pose a serious threat to their health and possibly their lives. The combination of toxic chemicals, intense electromagnetic fields, and apparent disregard for basic safety precautions suggests that they may be conducting experiments that have progressed beyond the bounds of reasonable scientific inquiry into territory that could prove fatal to all involved. The doctor's report to county authorities triggered the official investigation that would eventually reveal the true scope of the Grimwald family's research. Sheriff Coleman Bradshaw, recognizing the potential seriousness of the situation, organized a comprehensive examination of the property that included medical, legal, and technical expertise. The sheriff's expedition, conducted on December 5, 1910, included Deputy Marshal William Holbrook, Dr. Weatherby himself, County Surveyor Marcus Steinberg, and 2 additional men recruited from the town of Independence who had experience with industrial machinery and electrical equipment. The group was equipped with basic tools for forcing entry if necessary, medical supplies, chemical testing equipment, and camping gear in case an extended investigation proved necessary. Sheriff Bradshaw's official report, filed on December 7, 1910, documents what the investigation team discovered. Upon approaching the Grimwald property at approximately 1:00 p.m. on December 5, 1910, our party immediately observed the phenomena that have been reported by previous visitors. The electromagnetic effects were so pronounced that our compass readings became completely unreliable within half a mile of the main buildings, and several metal tools in our equipment began to behave strangely, showing magnetic attraction to objects that should not possess magnetic properties. The property itself showed clear evidence of recent habitation and ongoing activity. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, laundry hung on lines behind the main residence, and we could hear the sound of machinery operating somewhere within the complex of buildings. However, despite this obvious evidence of occupation, our repeated attempts to make contact with the inhabitants produced no response whatsoever. The sheriff's team approached their investigation systematically, beginning with a thorough examination of the exterior of all buildings and the surrounding grounds. The level of organization and sophistication evident in the Grimwald operation far exceeded anything we had expected to find in such a remote location. The buildings were constructed with obvious attention to both function and durability. The grounds were carefully maintained and improved, and there were clear indications of ongoing construction projects that suggested significant financial resources and long-term planning. Most remarkable was the evidence of electrical and mechanical infrastructure that would not have been out of place in a major industrial facility. We observed multiple power lines connecting the various buildings, what appeared to be sophisticated ventilation and cooling systems, and structural modifications that suggested the presence of heavy machinery within the workshop buildings. The team's examination of the main residence revealed a household that appeared to have been abandoned very recently, possibly within the past few hours. The interior showed evidence of normal domestic activity up to the point of apparent departure. Meals had been prepared but remained uneaten on the dining table. Personal belongings were arranged as if the inhabitants expected to return shortly, and beds were made but showed clear signs of recent occupation. However, certain aspects of the scene suggested that the departure had been planned rather than sudden. In the main bedroom, we discovered a collection of personal documents that had been carefully organized and left in a prominent location on the writing desk. These documents included property deeds, financial records, detailed instructions for the disposition of assets, and letters addressed to various individuals in distant cities. The most significant discovery was the extensive documentation that Thaddeus Grimwald had left behind. Mr. Grimwald's personal library and research records represented an extraordinary collection of scientific knowledge and experimental data. His journals, covering a period of over 15 years, documented a progression of research that began with simple electrical and chemical experiments and gradually evolved into investigations of unprecedented complexity and apparent danger. Sheriff Bradshaw's report describes the workshop facilities in terms that reveal his amazement at their sophistication. The main laboratory building contained equipment and apparatus that exceeded the capabilities of most university facilities. Multiple electrical generators of unusual design were connected to elaborate arrays of coils, transformers, and other devices, whose purpose was not immediately apparent to our investigators. The precision and quality of construction suggested that Mr. Grimwald possessed technical knowledge and fabrication capabilities of the highest order. The chemical laboratory was equally impressive, featuring distillation equipment, reaction vessels, and storage systems for what appeared to be hundreds of different compounds. Many of these substances were labeled with names and formulas that did not correspond to any chemicals known to our technical advisors, suggesting that Mr. Grimwald had been synthesizing entirely novel materials using his own theoretical framework. The investigation team's examination of the circular stone building provided additional insights into the scope of Grimwald's research. This structure, which Mr. Grimwald's documentation identified as an observation chamber, was designed with obvious attention to precision measurement and environmental control. The interior contained sophisticated instruments for monitoring atmospheric conditions, electromagnetic fields, and other environmental factors with a level of accuracy that exceeded anything available through commercial sources. Most significantly, the chamber contained detailed records documenting the electromagnetic anomalies that characterize the Widow's Bend area. These records, accumulated over a period of several years, revealed patterns and correlations that suggested Miss Grimwald had achieved a level of understanding about these natural phenomena that far exceeded contemporary scientific knowledge. County Surveyor Marcus Steinberg's technical assessment of the Grimwald apparatus provided additional context for understanding the family's research. From an engineering standpoint, the electrical and mechanical systems that Mr. Grimwald constructed represent remarkable achievements in precision fabrication and system integration. The electrical generators alone incorporate design innovations that I have never encountered in commercial or academic settings, and the overall system appears to be capable of producing electrical effects of unprecedented intensity and control. Most intriguingly, the apparatus appears to have been designed to interact with and amplify the natural electromagnetic anomalies that characterize the Widow's Bend area. The positioning and configuration of the various components suggests that Mr. Grimwald had not only studied these natural phenomena, but had developed techniques for harnessing and directing them for experimental purposes. Steinberg's report also addressed the question of where the family had obtained the resources necessary for such an elaborate operation. The financial investment represented by the Grimwald Research Facility would have been substantial by any standards. The materials alone, including precision instruments, rare chemicals, and custom fabricated components, would have required access to suppliers across the eastern United States and possibly Europe. The fact that such an operation could be established and maintained in complete secrecy suggests remarkable planning and organizational capability. Dr. Weatherby's medical examination of the abandoned property revealed additional concerns about the health effects of the family's research. The chemical residues and electromagnetic effects that persist throughout the property suggest that the inhabitants were exposed to potentially dangerous conditions on a regular basis. While I found no direct evidence of illness or injury, the long-term health consequences of such exposure could have been severe and possibly fatal. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed medical records that Mr. Grimwald had maintained for all members of the household. These records document various physiological effects that appeared to result from exposure to the experimental conditions, including alterations in blood chemistry, changes in electromagnetic sensitivity, and other effects that are not well understood by contemporary medical science. The investigation team's most significant discovery came when they examined the extensive documentation that the family had left behind. Thaddeus Grimwald's research journals, covering over 15 years of work, provided an extraordinary glimpse into the intellectual journey that had led to their current situation. The earliest entries, dating from 1895, describe relatively conventional experiments in electrical and chemical phenomena. Father's observations about the unusual electromagnetic properties of this valley have prompted me to conduct systematic investigations using proper scientific methods. My initial measurements confirm that there are indeed magnetic and electrical anomalies throughout the area that appear to follow patterns suggesting some form of underlying organization or structure. As the journal entries progress, they reveal an increasingly sophisticated understanding of the phenomena and growing excitement about their implications. The electromagnetic fields that concentrate in certain areas of the valley appear to exhibit properties that are not adequately explained by current electrical theory. Under certain conditions, these fields seem to become self-sustaining and even self-amplifying, suggesting the existence of natural processes that could potentially be harnessed for technological applications. By 1898, Grimwald's research had progressed to the construction of apparatus designed to interact with and manipulate the natural electromagnetic phenomena. The amplification chamber has exceeded all expectations in its ability to focus and intensify the natural fields. When properly tuned and operated under optimal atmospheric conditions, the apparatus can achieve field strengths that approach the theoretical limits of what matter can withstand without undergoing fundamental structural changes. The journal entries from 1900 onward reveal an increasing focus on what Grimwald termed biological applications of his electromagnetic research. The effects of controlled electromagnetic fields on living tissue appear to offer unprecedented opportunities for therapeutic intervention and biological modification. Initial experiments with plant specimens have demonstrated that properly applied fields can accelerate growth, enhance resistance to disease, and even induce beneficial mutations that improve survival characteristics. More disturbing are the entries from 1905 onward, which describe experiments involving what Grimwald called systematic biological optimization. The principles that govern electromagnetic influence on cellular processes appear to be universally applicable to all forms of life. With proper understanding and technique, it should be possible to direct the evolutionary development of any organism, achieving in months what natural selection might accomplish over millennia. The final entries in Grimwald's journal, dated just days before the investigation, reveal both the scope of his achievements and his growing concern about their implications. We have succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections in developing techniques for biological modification and enhancement. The members of our research team have all undergone systematic optimization procedures that have dramatically improved their physical and mental capabilities while extending their natural lifespan indefinitely. However, we have also discovered that these modifications come with consequences that we did not anticipate. The enhanced individuals develop sensitivities and requirements that make normal social interaction increasingly difficult and potentially dangerous. More significantly, the electromagnetic fields necessary to maintain the optimized state create environmental effects that could pose serious risks to unmodified humans. The journal's final entry provides a chilling explanation for the family's disappearance. We have concluded that our research has progressed to a point where continued isolation from normal human society is not only advisable, but absolutely necessary. The biological modifications that we have achieved are irreversible and incompatible with conventional human existence. We must therefore establish a new research facility in a location that offers complete isolation from any possibility of uncontrolled contact with unmodified humans. The apparatus and documentation that we leave behind represent only the initial phases of our research. The true scope of our achievements must remain secret until such time as humanity as a whole is prepared to understand and safely implement the techniques we have developed. Until that time, we will continue our work in locations and under conditions that ensure absolute secrecy and safety for all concerned. Sheriff Bradshaw's investigation team also discovered detailed plans for the establishment of a new research facility in a remote area of the Montana Territory. These plans, found among the documents left in the main residence, included maps, supply lists, correspondence with land agents, and detailed specifications for the construction of facilities that would be even more sophisticated than those in Widow's Bend. The correspondence with Montana land agents revealed that the family had been planning their relocation for over 2 years and had already acquired title to several thousand acres in an area that was even more isolated than Widow's Bend. The location, in the mountains of what is now Glacier National Park, was described in the correspondence as completely inaccessible except by specialized transportation and offering natural conditions that are optimal for our research requirements. More intriguingly, the correspondence suggested that the Grimwald family was not planning to relocate alone. Several letters reference additional research personnel who would be joining the new facility, and there are indications that other groups of researchers had been working on similar projects in locations throughout the western United States. The financial records left behind by the family revealed the enormous scope of their operation and their preparation for relocation. Bank statements and investment records indicated that they had accumulated resources worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, far more than could be explained by any conventional source of income. The records also showed recent liquidation of most assets and conversion to forms that would be easily transported to their new location. County Surveyor Steinberg's examination of the property's infrastructure revealed additional evidence of the family's departure preparations. The electrical and mechanical systems have been systematically shut down and secured in a manner that suggests long-term abandonment. However, the shutdown procedures were clearly designed to preserve the equipment's functionality, suggesting that the family intended to either return eventually or replicate their systems in a new location. Most significantly, several key components appear to have been removed from the apparatus and taken with the departing family. The missing components include the most sophisticated control systems and measurement devices, suggesting that they retain the capability to establish equivalent facilities elsewhere. The investigation team's final assessment of the Grimwald property and the family's research was documented in a comprehensive report that was filed with multiple government agencies. The Grimwald family appears to have achieved scientific breakthroughs that represent advances of decades or possibly centuries beyond current knowledge. Their departure from Virginia was clearly planned and voluntary, and there is no evidence of criminal activity or danger to public safety. However, the implications of their research and their apparent success in achieving biological modifications of human subjects raise questions that extend far beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. We recommend that this case be referred to federal authorities with the scientific expertise necessary to properly evaluate the evidence and determine appropriate follow-up actions. Sheriff Bradshaw's recommendation was acted upon, and within weeks of his report, federal investigators arrived to conduct their own examination of the Grimwald property. These investigators, whose identities and affiliations were never publicly disclosed, spent several months conducting a detailed study of the apparatus and documentation left behind. The federal investigation's findings were never released to the public, and the case was classified under national security provisions that remain in effect to this day. However, some details of their work became known through local residents who observed their activities and through government personnel who were involved in the investigation but were not bound by the same secrecy requirements as the primary investigators. According to these secondary sources, the federal investigators were particularly interested in the electromagnetic amplification apparatus and the biological modification techniques that Grimwald had developed. They apparently succeeded in replicating some of the family's experiments and confirmed that the biological effects described in the journals were genuine and reproducible. More significantly, the federal investigation reportedly discovered evidence that the Grimwald family had been in communication with other research groups working on similar projects in various parts of the United States. This network of researchers, all working in complete secrecy and isolation, appeared to be pursuing a coordinated program of biological enhancement and technological development that operated entirely outside normal scientific and government channels. The ultimate fate of the Grimwald family and their research remains unknown, despite extensive efforts by both government agencies and private researchers to trace their movements after leaving Virginia. No reliable records have been found of their establishment of a new facility in Montana or elsewhere. It is possible that they succeeded in achieving the complete isolation they sought and continued their work in locations that remain unknown to this day. However, there are persistent reports from various parts of the American West of phenomena similar to those that characterize the Grimwald property in Virginia. These reports, dating from the 1910s through the present day, describe unusual lights, electromagnetic anomalies, and encounters with individuals who display unusual capabilities and apparent immunity to aging. While most of these reports can be attributed to natural phenomena or conventional explanations, a small number involve observations that are difficult to explain using conventional scientific knowledge. These cases have attracted the attention of researchers who believe they may represent evidence that the Grimwald family's research continued and possibly expanded after their departure from Virginia. The property in Widow's Bend was eventually acquired by the federal government in 1915 and designated as a restricted research area. The official explanation for this action was concern about environmental contamination from the chemical and electromagnetic residues left behind by the family's experiments. However, the level of security maintained at the site and the sophisticated monitoring equipment that was installed suggest that the government's interest was more than purely environmental. The site remains under federal control to this day, officially designated as an environmental remediation area, but actually serving as a research facility where government scientists continue to study the electromagnetic phenomena and attempt to understand the principles underlying Grimwald's biological modification techniques. While most of the original apparatus was removed decades ago, the fundamental electromagnetic anomalies that attracted Grimwald's attention continue to manifest with undiminished intensity. Modern scientific instruments have confirmed that the Widow's Bend area exhibits electromagnetic properties that cannot be adequately explained by conventional geophysical theories. The patterns and intensities of these effects suggest the presence of some form of organized structure beneath the valley floor, possibly of artificial origin, that continues to influence the local environment decades after Grimwald's departure. More intriguingly, recent advances in biological science have begun to provide theoretical frameworks that could explain some of Grimwald's apparent achievements. Research in fields such as electromagnetic biology, genetic engineering, and life extension has revealed principles and techniques that suggest Grimwald's work may have been far more scientifically sound than originally believed. Several prominent researchers in these fields have expressed interest in gaining access to Grimwald's original documentation and apparatus, believing that his work might provide insights that could accelerate current research by decades. However, the continued classification of most materials related to the case has prevented any comprehensive analysis of his techniques and results. The story of the Grimwald family represents one of the most fascinating examples of independent scientific research in American history. Their achievement in establishing a sophisticated research facility in complete isolation and their apparent success in achieving biological modifications that exceeded the capabilities of mainstream science by decades demonstrates the potential for individual genius to transcend institutional limitations. However, their story also raises profound questions about the responsibility of researchers to share their discoveries with the broader scientific community and the potential dangers of pursuing advanced technologies without adequate oversight or safety precautions. The fact that their work required complete isolation from normal human society suggests that they may have achieved capabilities that were inherently dangerous or incompatible with conventional civilization. Perhaps most significantly, the continuing government interest in the Grimwald case and the persistent classification of related materials suggests that their research may have implications that extend far beyond historical curiosity. Whether their work represents a road that science should explore or a path that leads to consequences too dangerous to risk remains an open and critically important question. The electromagnetic anomalies that persist in Widow's Bend serve as a permanent reminder that some forms of scientific inquiry can produce effects that outlast their creators by generations. Whatever the Grimwald family accomplished in their mountain laboratory, the consequences of their work continue to influence the environment where they conducted their experiments, creating a lasting monument to both the power of human imagination and the unpredictable nature of scientific discovery. For those few researchers who are aware of the case's details, the Grimwald family's story serves as both an inspiration and a warning. Their achievements demonstrate that remarkable scientific advances are possible when brilliant minds are freed from institutional constraints and provided with adequate resources and isolation. However, their ultimate fate also illustrates the potential isolation and alienation that can result when research progresses beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. The mystery of what became of the Grimwald family and whether their research continues in some unknown location remains one of the most intriguing unsolved puzzles in the history of American science. Their legacy, preserved in the electromagnetic phenomena that continue to characterize Widow's Bend and in the classified government research that their work inspired, represents a unique chapter in the story of human intellectual achievement and the endless quest to understand and transcend the limitations of natural existence. As modern science continues to advance toward capabilities that were unimaginable a century ago, the Grimwald family's story serves as a reminder that the boundaries between possible and impossible are more fluid than we might assume, and that individual determination and genius can sometimes achieve what institutions and governments cannot. Whether their example represents a path that humanity should follow, or a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition, remains a question that each generation must answer for itself.